All right, thank you for listening in to another episode of Where the Fortune Is. And I tell you what, I am honored today. We actually have the church that I attend, Living Hope, and we actually have the pastor preaching a vision on the show today. We actually have Greg Gibson. You can call him Gib. He's actually an Oklahoma native, and has been part of the church and been there for over the past 14 years. And when my wife and I actually first moved back to Carville, I give credit to my wife on this. She actually calls it church dating. We would go to a couple of different churches, try to figure out which one was our fit. And the best thing, really kind of fit, what we were looking for. And then we walked in the Living Hope through a connection through Andrew Bowie mentioned it to us. And we heard Gib preach and we hooked. We knew this is the place we needed to be. And aside from Gib, everybody else within the church just extremely welcoming, treat us like family from day one since we've been there. So it's been an honor to actually have Gib on the show. So Gib, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I know you have been in, like I said, for like over 14 years with the church. How did that like did you just know out the gate, hey, you know what? I'm a young buck, in Oklahoma that hey, I'm gonna be pastor one day. This is it. This is my calling.
No, I mean there was a lot of what we would say in the pastoral world, a lot of providential steps where I felt like the Lord led me to that. I grew up in a pretty remote part of Oklahoma, rural, largely poor and working class, and my family was no exception to the sort of typical dysfunctions that kind of plagued our part of the world. And so my parents got a divorce when I was going into my freshman year of high school, and I spent the majority of high school just kind of wandering around and trying to figure out how I was going to mature in life because dad wasn't a part of the picture, didn't have a whole lot of positive influences. And I sort of stumbled in church through a network of relationships my senior year of high school, and that's whenever I was converted and was baptized. And at that time, my plan was to go into some sort of sports medicine study because I wanted to go to college, and I love sports. I wasn't athletic enough to play professionally in anything. I'd figured that out by then, and so I was like, that's what I was leaning into. And so I went to college in Southeast Oklahoma for about a week, and just had a deeply unsettling of my spirit there, to where felt like the Lord was leading me to something else. And so I wound up transferring to a Bible college, which then sort of began the long pursuit for me of ministry. And along the way, probably the most significant step in all that process was an older man, pastor, had just kind of invited me into his life to mentor me and to what we would say in the church, disciple me. And so that relationship was very significant for me, and seeing what he did as a pastor as not just appealing to me, but a calling from God. And I felt like the Lord really solidified that for me. So that was sort of the early stages. And then winding up at Living Hope was um, a myriad of uh, providential encounters between other people passing my name along, and guys that had relationships that pre-existed even me, that sort of referred me to them. And so, yeah, I wound up here. I'd been a pastor for about 3 years at the time, and been here ever since.
Oh wow, so you said 3 years. So it's not something you have to just apply to. Someone actually referred, said, hey, you gotta check out Gib over here.
Yeah. So whenever I was
Yeah.
in Oklahoma, I was at a Baptist church just north of Tulsa, and I started off as the youth pastor there, and was the youth pastor for 2.5 years or so. Um, when the founding pastor had stepped away to pursue another ministry calling, and the church had just asked me to fill in and preach while they found someone. I was 25 at the time, I guess. So
Yeah.
I was doing the youth ministry, but preaching on Sundays. And after about, I don't know, 3 or 4 months of preaching on Sundays, the church asked me to just continue preaching and become the senior pastor. At the time, at 25, 26, I didn't know what I didn't know. And I was like, okay, I like preaching, and this will be awesome. And that actually is what led to me actually coming to Living Hope eventually. Was there was a pastor in our association who had heard that one of the smaller churches in the association had just hired a 25, 26-year-old pastor. And so he was like, I got to find this kid before he gets himself fired or does something really dumb. And so he was pouring into me, mentoring me, and that's whenever he had heard about Living Hope looking for someone, and he gave them my name. Um,
Hmm.
and so that, one thing led to another, and the Lord led us here.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You mentioned a couple times about having mentors when you were in your early stage of going through um, and into your career. What about through the now? Do you still, even though you feel like you've achieved a lot to this point, for being a pastor, but has there ever been a time where you still have to tap into, a mentor, or maybe a close friend or somebody to help you out?
Absolutely. Part of that early on for me was just kind of growing up without a dad in the picture. Like a lot of men, especially men my age now that I bump into, there's just a hunger and a yearning for someone to not just show you attention, but to help you. And so whenever I became a Christian, the local pastor, I guess for whatever reason, obviously like his calling and stuff, but he really took the time to speak into my life and to give it some direction, show me how to be a husband, how to be a father, and how to do just normal things in life too. Um, and one of the things he said early on was, he said, Gib, you learn one of two ways. Everyone learns one of two ways. This is from the Proverbs. You learn by experience, or you learn by being taught.
Hmm.
And learning by experience is way harder.
Yeah,
That's trial and error, and mostly error. Learning by
yeah,
experience is way more difficult than learning by having someone teach you. And so that just became a pattern of my life, to surrender to the wisdom of those who've gone before. And even to this day, it's still in the midst of all that's going on in our world right now. I still talk to my mentor, and we're 25 years down the road now. And rarely do I go a couple more than a month or two without hitting him up and saying, "Hey, what about this? Or what are you doing about that? Or what have
hmm,
you learned about this?" And he's just this he dispenses wisdom as part of his secondhand nature, I think. And so I've aspired to have that someone who's in that role in my life pretty much continuously,
yeah.
because I didn't have it growing up.
That's a testament to you as well and your character, and also to being open for that, because yeah, you can learn, by being taught, but some people don't want to be learned. They'd rather just, bullhead go, I'll figure it out my own and, forge my own path in life. But I mean, that's a testament to you to actually realize, hey, you know what? I have to be open and receptive, not only from, the Lord aspect, but also from a mentor, as well, to have that channel, because if not, then I feel like it stunts our growth and we can't achieve what we want to achieve.
Well, yeah, you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And the reason that they're called blind spots is because you can't see them. And so just having someone external to your situation who has more experience than you, or even a different perspective than you, um, is of inestimable value. And I think that the scripture teaches that it's the ministry of Jesus was one of discipleship. The church at her best is a place where those who have walked with the Lord longer than others can share with others what they've gleaned from that. And so, yeah, I just I see it as indispensable for living life. The Proverbs are loaded with contrasts and comparisons between the wise and the foolish. And the trademark of the fool is to never listen to or heed counsel and wisdom from others. So I don't want to be a fool. And I'm profoundly capable of being foolish. So I always need someone who can point those things out to me.
Yeah, I think we're all at some point of that, and my kids are now trying to tell them that. I feel like if I hammer home enough to them about open and being receptive and being willing to learn and grow, because it'll be for their benefit and not their detriment. And because my son, as you know, he's 11, he thinks, hey, you know what? As soon as school's over with, I stop learning, I'm good to go. So he has a countdown to when he gets out of college. I'm like,
Mhm.
you better pump the brakes, man, because you gotta
Yeah.
you gotta constantly keep learning to grow.
Yeah, and when you get out of college is when the really hard lessons start. Um,
Yeah.
Everything up to that point is child's play. Well, and that's another area too. Like with even parenting, I think that it's very advisable for anyone, especially like if you're parenting teenagers, like I am now, to have someone who's as we would say where I'm from, hoed that row before, and can say like, "Hey, you're not failing as a parent. Every teenager is going to test their boundaries. They're always going to be they're going to be obstinate. You're going to say something to them 1,000 times, and then some uh, complete idiot's going to say the same thing you've said. And they're going to say that's all amazing, and you're going to be like, "Well, I tell you that all the time." You know,
Yeah.
that's the way this thing works. And so having someone from with an outside perspective who's gone down that path before is super helpful to give you perspective.
Yeah, no, it's so spot on. I feel like I know that just happened recently with my kids. We said something like you said 1,000 times, and then a friend of ours said something, literally to Finnegan. And I thought, and he just latched onto it like it's the first time he heard it. And I thought, how is
Give
that
me some
possible?
credit, you plagiarist. I've been
Yeah,
saying that for years. Yeah.
yeah. Through what all you've gone through, I mean, it's just impressive to where you are. Is it? Oh, look at that! My phone ringing. Thought I silenced that. Well, if I can hit mute, it'd be nice. All right, good thing this is recording.
Yeah.
I'll silence it now. Um, I'll pause a second. Yeah, through everything you've gone through, your transition, throughout the ministry, has there ever been a time I feel like, or like a moment you've had a setback that you kind of, I know you've had mentors to help guide you along the way, and of course, you have scripture as well. But has there ever been a moment that you've, had that setback and you really had to learn to overcome from that, or is that just? I feel like that doesn't happen in ministry. I don't know. It could be way off. I just feel like because you're just on the constant ascend to move up, from like you said, from a church from Oklahoma, and all of a sudden you came here. But has there ever been that moment where you might not have one? I don't know.
Yeah. So if you're talking about just a setback in the sense of like professionally,
It
or
could be personal, whatever you feel
yeah,
comfortable discussing.
yeah, I think that as the longer I do ministry, the more I see that some measure of suffering is not the exception; it's the rule. That it is the pathway to being refined. It is the mode through which we grow. It's Second Corinthians chapter 4. We're pressed but not crushed. We're persecuted but not abandoned. We're struck down but not destroyed. I'm always being given over to the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be for others. And so, um, in 2013, while my oldest was having open heart surgery to repair a congenital heart defect,
Mm,
while we were kind of suffering through that trial, my dad died, and we had sort of a strained relationship for the majority, if not the entirety, of my life. And so, having to untangle um, those emotions and those regrets and those doubts and those fears, while also grieving um, everything my daughter was going through.
mm,
Like I learned probably more in the 6 to 12 months after those events happened simultaneously than I had in the first decade of pastoral ministry, just because that's the human experience,
yeah.
grief and death and loss, um, and then learning how. I think it made me a better pastor, it made me more empathetic towards when people are suffering. It helped me to realize like there's certain times when I sit with someone in a hospital room or at a funeral home planning a funeral service where um, the best thing I can do is be silent, weep with those who weep. So I don't know if it's a setback. It wasn't a setback professionally, but it was certainly a setback in my emotional and spiritual health for a season.
Hmm.
But it also helped me learn how to endure and persevere
Yeah.
better.
Oh, man, that's. Oh, I appreciate you sharing that, but and you kind of touched on it too, and I was thinking about when you said being there for others, either if they have to go through a funeral, a hospital, and then of course with your own family, and then of course being the pastor of the church, and then everything else is going on within the world and outside sources, and then and then juggling family life and personal life with friends, and then I just feel like you have to have very broad shoulders, and then just a, not only strong faith, but there's a lot that has to go into it. I feel like there's a lot sometimes for me from the outside looking in. I feel like you have sometimes a weight of the world on your shoulders. And how do you like overcome that or balance that? Is it through, is it with talking with your wife, or is it, leaning in a prayer more? Is it through mentors? I don't know how you do it, man. Hats off to you for doing that.
Yeah, it's some of the it's in some respects it's the all the above. Like my wife
Mhm,
is one of my favorite songs is by a guy named Andrew Peterson, where it's about marriage, and he says the name of the title of the song is "My One Safe Place,"
mhm,
and that's really what my wife Jill has been to me over the past 18 years. Is this one place where I can be completely vulnerable and completely honest about like, hey, if it were up to me, today would be the day that I'd turn in my resignation and I go see if Walmart needs cart pushers, because that's the job that's most appealing right now.
yeah,
Leave me alone, and I know that all I got to do is get the carts in the building, and I'm done with my job. That's what I want to do.
yeah,
Um, so I need someone that I can vent that to, who doesn't really think that I'm about to pull that trigger. Although here lately, she's probably a little bit worried that I'm actually going to do it. Um, but that, and then also I think sacred friendships, friends that um, know you at your worst and didn't didn't run. I've got to have people for whom they they are in my life. I know that they're going to give me wisdom, and yet I've got to feel the freedom to share what's really going on, free of judgment.
mhm,
And I don't mean that like in the sense that they won't tell me what I'm doing is that they refuse to tell me what I'm doing is wrong, but that whenever they tell me that, they're not telling me that to inflict an injury, but instead to correct in a loving, reproving, godly way. So friendship is super important, and I learned from that season in 2013. I've got to put it on my calendar and in my schedule, because um, I'll always punt on unhurried time with friends, because it seems like a luxury and not a necessity. And
mhm,
I've done this long enough to realize my own mental and spiritual and emotional health uh, is I don't have it if I don't put unhurried time with friends on my calendar.
yeah,
Like I'll break up, I'll fall apart. So those two things, and then for me, I've got to exercise regularly. I've got to watch what I eat, because I could just be lazy and gluttonous and then wonder why I feel like the world's caving in. And it's like, oh, it's because I'm on my third plate of nachos and a Netflix binge. That's why. Um,
yeah,
so that's just a few things.
yeah. That's so true. I hear that a lot, but you're right. For that mental health, they got to have that balance of all, well, three or four if if you count the spiritual aspect as well. Because with that, I feel like for me, I noticed if I have one of those just you know off kilt, if it's just out of place, if I'm not exercising, or if I'm not just reaching out to a friend, when I need to, or I'm not in scripture as much as I need, like whatever. I feel like if one of those are off, then my balance is off. And I feel like
Hmm.
once I get all those back in place and I'm more centered and focused, and I can have more clear-headed, thoughts, if you will, like when I go about
Yeah.
life.
Yep. Hey, can we hit pause just real quick?
Yeah, sure.
I've got to go to the bathroom. I had 3 cups of coffee. I'm dying, man.
Yeah,
Let me
sure, no
let
problem.
me hit mute on this. I'll be right.
A doctor's appointment, so we just happened to walk in. I was just telling them, hey, real quick, because Katie just ran to Costco. They show up real quick, and then kids are downstairs. But anyways, it'll let me a chance to give them a shout with them walking around. My mom has a lot of anxiety, and as you can know, she would be wondering where I am. Katie's not here. The kids are in the house. What's happening?
Yeah.
She's starting to sound the alarms.
Yeah.
See, I'm trying to think. We're talking about the balance of everything, and um,
Hmm.
through through like having all that balance and the cohesiveness, if you will, of for like those four pillars, of strength to really, help, you keep, balance and focus with everything that's going on. Um, One thing I was impressed with is the fact that Living Hope actually gave us some sabbatical last year, and which was first when I heard it, I thought, why? And then I started thinking about it more because at first I was kind of never heard that before with the church. And then when I heard that, and then I started thinking about it more, I thought, and rightfully so. Like I can only imagine the amount of stuff you're being pulled in the amount of directions and the roads you're having to go down. Um, how was it kind of coming back from that? I feel like it was, imagine it was nice, have that sigh of relief to, really connect, on a deeper level with your family. But coming back from that, how's that transition?
Yeah, we're almost a year uh, removed from whenever I went on sabbatical, which is really good. One of the main reasons that sabbatical, I think, for especially for pastors, is such an essential practice is just due to the fact that the work is kind of like I said earlier, was wanting to push carts at Walmart. When you have done your job. You have either put the carts back in the building or you haven't. And so there's a clear, definitive line in the sand, like my job is done and I did a good job. In pastoral ministry, we don't have those sort of markers
Hmm.
because sometimes a really good sermon may offend a lot of people. But it doesn't feel like it was a good sermon because all you're getting is hate mail for a week. And sometimes a really bad sermon, according to Second Timothy, a really bad sermon may get you a really big following. So, it's tough to gauge that, and
Yeah.
you deal with. So you have that aspect that you don't really know when you've done your job or when you've done your job well. The second thing is there's really never it's never you're never off. So like we fight in our family to maintain a Sabbath practice. For me, it's Friday's my day off. But even my family knows that I'm always one phone call away from disrupting everything.
Hmm.
Um, Someone's in a crisis, someone is severely injured, or someone died. Um, that's when the bat signal goes up, and we're being looked to step in to help, which is what we signed up for. So you're never really. It's really hard to be completely and totally offline.
Yeah.
And then I'd say the third component of it that made it really essential and necessary is that Sunday's always coming. And so if you labor in preaching and teaching, which I do, not all pastors do, but most do, um, there's never a time when you're not haunted in some respects by the fact that the clock is ticking and you have to create new content. And for anyone who does any sort of creative venture, you know what it's like to have to turn off the practical part of your brain that gets
Hmm.
things done and turn on the creative side of your brain that doesn't always want to cooperate with a timeline,
Yeah.
or a deadline. It's like, I've got to come up with something creative. And oh, by the way, I've got 2 hours to get it done. That we weren't really designed for that. And so that combination of factors made a sabbatical really good to be able to say, okay, for a season, I don't have to gauge whether or not I've done my job or done it well. For a season, I'm really offline. And for a season, I'm not going to have to worry about Sundays always coming. The third week of sabbatical was the first time in 15 years that I had gone more than 2 weeks without having to create content and preach.
Yeah.
Um, and so I remember vividly the third Sunday of sabbatical being like, oh, well, so this is what this feels like to not have to
Yeah.
do that. To not have in the back of my brain, I've got to be coming up with something. One of my favorite books that I've used as I've taught preachers, even over the past couple of years. One of the books I've said is the best book I've read on preaching is Tina Fey's book, Bossy Pants, the writer from SNL,
Yeah.
because she says some things in there that really track with preaching. One of the things is she says in the writers' room at SNL, they had a sign, I think it was, that said, "We go on at at 11:30 on Saturday night, not because we're done writing, but because it's 11:30 and it's Saturday night."
Hmm.
In other words, like, we're never done with our job.
Yeah.
And that's how preaching is. I tell preachers all the time, you preach your sermon at 10:45 on Sunday morning, not because you've crafted the sermon and it's done, but because it's Sunday morning and it's
Yeah.
10:45. And then the other thing she said is that every week when the curtain would close at SNL, that this sense of dread would sort of fall on you, like, oh no, I've got to do it all over again, and the clock starts now.
Hmm.
And that's really the feeling of preaching, is like whenever I say my last amen and the service ends, it's not like, yay, I've got that done. It's like, oh no, the clock just started over again, and I've got to do that again in 7 days.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Where some people, when they're looking at their watch or their time and think, hey, you know what, my work day's over with, they can, log off, punch out, whatever the case may be, and just unplug from work, go to their family. Where, like you said, you're just the wheel keeps going. It's just a constant spinning to, on to the next, on to the next.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And the deadline never shifts or changes. It's not like the sales quarter. We just finished it. We've got a week to kind of catch our breath before we ramp back up. It's like, no, we've got 6 days. And every day that I take off is just punishing myself all the more because now I've got fewer days to get the work done in. So
Yeah. Yeah. Katie worries about me a lot where, you know, I know when my threshold is, enough, for work wise, but she worries that I'm never going to be satisfied. And
mhm.
I feel like that maybe comes from being an Enneagram 3. Maybe that has something to do with it, plaguing me, behind. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
just driven to accomplish and achieve. Yeah.
yeah. But with that, I saw a, there's one through that Enneagram. He came up, and I love this thing here. It says, I become deceitful when I am living for my success. And I said, but when I deny myself and live from his success, I become a truthful force of God and others. A truthful
Mhm.
force for God and others. I keep this a constant reminder, like, hey, it's not about you, man.
Yeah, that's good, man. That's
Yeah.
good.
Um, well, for anybody out there, man, that is, hears this and think, hey, you know what? Because I've met some people before. They'll go, man, you know what? I almost, was going to be a pastor, but I changed my mind or whatever. They had something that reshifted their focus, and then they feel, hey, you know what, I want to get back into the church. Or if there's anybody out there that's either considering going into ministry, or maybe they just want to get more plugged in with their church and really help out, so they can furthermore help out their community, what would be some bit of advice, a little, some like golden nuggets you would like to give them?
Yeah, I think for those who would contemplate stepping into pastoral ministry, um, if you can find a trusted friend or mentor who will really help you drill down on your motives, the earlier you can dissect and discern why you're wanting to do that, the 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 better off you'll be. And I tell folks all the time, we human beings are really good at deluding ourselves. We're really good at lying to ourselves. So we need someone with some measure of objectivity to ask us hard questions. And early on in my aspirations to pastoral ministry, the guy that mentored and discipled me asked the question, like, "Why do you want to do this?" I said, "Well, I mean, the Lord has changed my life, um, and I feel like what I've experienced in having a relationship with Jesus Christ, I just want to tell others about that." And my mentor said, "Okay, I'm not necessarily sure that means you should go into pastoral ministry. I think it just means you're a Christian." And that was really helpful. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I need some more evidence. I need some more time to see how this plays out. And so having someone who can kind of peek in and say that, I think that's important. For someone who's considering like getting back into church, my admonition to them is always uh, consider the lower points of your life and what you wish you would have had in those moments. And almost always, it's going to come down to a couple of things: a community that you knew was in it with you, that regardless of the outcome, they weren't going anywhere. Um, a truth source or some measure of wisdom that you could be anchored to, that in those moments felt stable and not given to the whims of whatever conditions had befallen you. Um, and you know how desperately you need love. And so for someone, if you can consider your lowest points of life, and you know those three things are essential ingredients, I would say outside of the church, you have a really hard time finding or recreating that. And churches that are not those things are bad churches, but there are a lot of really good churches who provide those things. A community that's going to walk with you through pain and suffering, the truth of the scriptures is going to be a guide to you in your lower moments that you can hold to some sort of anchor when you're in the storms of life. And then third, a place of unconditional love. That's the hope of the gospel. That's what God gives us in Jesus Christ. So if you're considering getting back in church, don't consider it from where you are at this station in life. Go back to the dark moments and say, at my heart of hearts, gut level honest, that's what I needed, was that in my life.
Wow.
And so get it now.
Yeah, man, it's so powerful, and so true. I never looked at it from that standpoint, but I mean, I imagine probably people that hear that they really tap into that, because I feel like on the other side of that coin, where they don't tap into that, then they look through other resources to actually, suppress a lot of things that are going on within their life, and then they, might tap into, their addiction, or they might turn to drugs or alcohol, or they might turn to a very dark and lonely place for that, and then they can pull themselves from that by tapping into that bottle, and or whatever the case may be, to pull them out of there, and they realize it's just ultimately it's sinking them further down into where they don't want to be, and what they're trying to, further away from the light, if you will.
Yeah, the vast majority of us who try to cover shame in some way other than with God's goodness, grace, and love towards us, whatever we use to try to cover our shame actually creates more shame. It's a downward spiral. It's a self-perpetuating cycle of like, I feel shame, so I drink, and then then I feel the shame for the drinking, which is, it's whatever I eat, overeat, whatever the thing may be, whatever the mask may be that we wear. It not only does it not cover us, it creates more of a need for that. And so, yeah, the church at her best is the place to cover you with grace and love, and not with things to escape or numb out. And I would just say too that I've done, man, in my now 20 years of ministry, I've done um, dozens upon dozens of funerals. I've done funerals for people who never missed church. I've done funerals for people who are in and out of church. I've done funerals for people who never stepped a foot in church. I've never done a funeral for anyone who their family didn't say, you know what, I really hate that we spent this much time considering spiritual things and being around spiritual people.
Yeah.
Never. Like, everyone is like, even if they had been in church their whole life, there's some measure of assurance or of hope that is tethered to their deceased loved ones' relationship with God, or aspirations to follow the Lord in some way. I've never heard of anyone saying, "Man, I really regret the pursuit of spiritual growth and immaturity at this moment of darkness and grief."
Yeah. I mean, imagine me kind of taken aback if somebody did come up and say that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, that part of one of the fundamental truths of Christianity, as much as I can glean this from the Bible, is that this particular way of faith is for those who have tasted the bitter fruit of suffering, um, and the results of their own inadequacies or failures, and realize they are completely and totally unable to save themselves, and so they lean into one who gave his life for them. And I just don't know of a lot of regrets associated with that.
Hmm. Wow. That's that's another powerful thing as well. But um, talking about regret, one thing I don't want to do is regret taking a lot of time away from you. So I want to give that time back to you. I know that you have a lot going on. Clearly, especially I can only imagine right now with things that are going on in society, and with church. But um, so with that said, I definitely want to give that back to you so you can have time with your family, and then get back to whatever you need to, in scripture, whatever being called. Thankfully, the phone didn't ring for you, and you didn't get called away for something during this. But Gib, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on the show, and it means the world to me, man. And I'll be praying for you, brother, to stay strong and to keep moving forward.
Oh, thanks, Robbie. It was a joy. Love doing it.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, just real quick, if you could.